to get us started today, I want us to think about, so a few people share with me maybe your favorite opening book or a movie with a really good opening scene, and then share why that is a good opening scene. So I think we can all agree that a good opening scene does several things, like it might provide the setting, introduces us to the main character, also that kind of draws us in, creates anticipation, even might be action-packed. Some opening scenes are very action-packed. And by that, we usually mean like guns and glory, right? So when we think about creation, though, especially Genesis 1, so we're going to cover Genesis 1 today, Genesis 2 on Wednesday. I want you to think about, again, we get so accustomed to reading this stuff that we forget that the first chapter of the Bible is the opening scene of the Bible. And like a good opening scene, it sets our gaze on the main character, right? It tells us what the main character is doing. And if we kind of lean a little bit away from the guns and glory as our definition of action. The first chapter is full of action, and it's action that we continue to experience the results of even today, right? But another thing about this opening scene of the Bible that it does probably well than any other opening scene we'd ever encounter is it actually kind of, we find ourselves in the story. Like it draws us in because it tells us we're part of the story immediately, right? When God makes humanity. So as we think about Genesis 1 as an opening story, what it does is really going to set us up for how we read the rest of the Bible. So what I want to do today is kind of walk through, give a brief summary of this opening creation account, the story, and then talk a little bit about a couple of questions that are related to your BSQs last night. And then that should exhaust class today. So the first thing I want to do is notice that I've used a double title here, like creation. Remember, that's the traditional name of the traditional act of the biblical story. And then the pattern of the kingdom is Von Roberts. Do you remember from pattern? So let's review. Who are God's people in the pattern of the kingdom? Adam and Eve, go ahead. Where's God's place? Garden of Eden. God's rule and blessing. Anybody remember this one? So God's rule is represented by His Word, God's Word, and then God's blessing is perfect relationships. So just a review of Von Roberts. So let's jump in to Genesis 1 today. So first thing, I want to give you kind of a brief summary of the creation account. A little warning here. I'm giving you kind of my take on what's going on in creation. Just, you all know this probably if you've been around like any church setting, that there are multiple positions on Genesis. On Wednesday, we might have time to get into some of those different views. If not, I actually have a bonus YouTube video on the YouTube channel that you can watch if you're really interested in that stuff, where I briefly kind of outline the views and then talk about how we should dialogue about the different views. So what I want to do today is just kind of jump in and roll through it. So if you have your Bibles, Genesis 1 is where we're going to be. And so if we start, we read the Bible. The first verse, which almost everybody knows, is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So what I call Genesis 1:1 is God's initial act of creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, from using our vocabulary today, what would we label heavens and earth? Everything. Universe. How's universe work? Okay? But you're right. So keep in mind when they say heavens and earth, they're talking about everything you stand on and everything you look out and see. Now, obviously, they didn't know how extensive the universe was, but that's what we're doing. Okay, so heavens and earth. So the universe. God, in the beginning, God created everything, the universe, okay? That's what I'm calling the initial act of creation. Then in verse 2, those of you who have your Bibles, the camera goes from wide angle lens, like universe, then it zooms down on the earth. And what is the original state of the earth described as in Genesis 1:2? It says, and the earth was formless and void. And you're like, what does that mean, right? Has anybody ever wondered that before? It's pretty vague terms. In Hebrew, it's something else. But anyway, and then we go, and then what? And the what? And darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. So we know two things for sure that were involved, right? We've got two hints. So what picture, what image might come in your mind when you picture Genesis 1:2? Is it like that? Minus the light. There would have been no light, but you have to have light to get a picture, so you have to have moonlight here. So just picture almost sitting on a boat in the middle of the ocean at night. Do y'all agree with that? Like it's water covered and there's darkness everywhere. All right? So one clarification. When I say the word earth, what image pops in your head? Not from 1:2, just earth in general. What image pops in your head? Yeah, the globe. Satellite imagery, right? Did they have satellite imagery then? No, they would actually picture the earth as, in what way? Flat. Yeah, so we picture a sphere. They would have pictured the earth as more flat, like this. But again, their picture would not have been from space. They would have pictured it from like right here. Like I'm standing here and this is how I experience the world. Okay? But the key, this is supposed to be water, by the way. Don't judge my drawings. Okay. So everybody got this. So it's water covered, and then it's dark. So immediately we recognize as humans that if it stays this way, we can't live there, right? So that's where in verse 3, it kicks in what I would call the 6 days of making. The 6 days of making. In verse 2-3 it says, and God said, let there be light. And there was light, right? So those of you who have your notes, this chart is in your notes, correct? Okay, those of you who don't, write fast. Okay, so here we go. Two things I want to say about this. First, let's talk a little bit about the relationship between the initial act of creation and the days of making. I would argue that much, not all, you heard that? Much, not all, of what God does on these 6 days is shaping and forming what He already created on Genesis 1:1. Let me just give you two examples. Let's take day 3. Those of you who have your Bibles open, this is in chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. In order to make the dry land, it says He gathered the waters together in one place, and it says the dry land water, dry ground, anybody looking at the text? Appeared. Do you see it? So did God create new stuff under it? What day 3 is God rearranged what He already made. He gathers the waters and the dry ground appears. Does that make sense? And then if you keep reading, it says that He brought the plants from the ground. All right? And then one other example is humans. Everybody knows this one. In Wednesday, when you read chapter 2, He created Adam from dirt, dust. So He took the dust and He formed man. However, then He breathed into his nostrils a breath of life, which I would argue is a new aspect of creation. That's a different thing. But anyway, does everybody understand that? So God creates the raw material, so to speak, in 1:1, and then the 6 days He is shaping it. The best imagery might be the imagery of a potter. So if you think about a potter, he takes the clay, and then he puts it on the wheel, and he has to shape it. The difference is that the Genesis 1:1, God creates the clay, like out of nothing. There was no clay. And God creates the clay. And then much of what He does on the 6 days is He's shaping it into what He wants it. Second thing, notice if you look at this chart, how each day, the first 3 days parallel the second 3 days. There's a pattern of 2 sets of 3. So you see how light corresponds to sun, moon, and stars, which are the source of light. You got the sky and the sea on day 2. And then day 5, you get the birds that inhabit the sky and the fish that inhabit the sea. Day 3, you got dry land and plants. And then day 6, you have the land animals and humans who live on the dry ground and who eat the plants. So there's this correspondence between the days there. So many scholars have taken that formless and void thing, that paradigm, and said on days 1 through 3, God is forming. And on days 4 through 6, God is filling. So forming and filling is the way that many think about that. Now let's turn our attention to creation's not over at this point. However, the problem is chapter 1 ends. So I want you guys to hear this. The chapter and verse divisions are not original in your Bibles. Okay, they were added much later to make ease of reference. And it's really bad when you blow it on the first chapter if you're the guy dividing the verses in chapters. Because what has happened is we stop, the chapter 1 ends at verse 31, right? Like your BSQ last night. But the creation doesn't end until 2-3. Because the forgotten day is day 7, and it's the 7th day of rest. In chapter 2, verses 1-3. Now, I'm going to ask a rhetorical question. You guys know the answer to this. But if we think about why God rested, did God need rest? No. The Psalms tell us that God does not grow weary. He does not need rest. Is everybody good on that? So God did not rest because he was tired. So then why did God rest on the 7th day? Good, I love it. Yes, I like that one. So one I would say is to enjoy his creation, and then the other one is to set a pattern for humanity, right? Okay, so let's take it one on one. So to enjoy his creation, or because in 2:3, or 2:3, it tells us it was all that he had done was completed. The heavens and earth were completed. So he finished a project, but I like the idea of enjoying his work, right? If you guys ever had a project you're working on, and I know it's probably different for a lot of us, whether that be an art project, a construction project. Unless you're extremely busy, I think it's actually good if you finish a project to just take some time just to enjoy it. Grab a cup of coffee, glass of sweet tea, whatever, and just kind of enjoy what you've done and really celebrate, right? And I do think that's part of it. God ceased working on the 7th day, and if you look at the 7th day, by the way, the wording and everything's different about it. It's really set apart. But the second thing is that later the 7th day, which is a Saturday, becomes Israel's Sabbath under the Old Covenant and the Ten Commandments. And then I would argue for all of humanity, what this teaches us is that we need rest. God created a pattern of work and rest, and it's very important for us as humans to realize our need for rest. And might I add, C of O students in particular, to make sure that you are zealous for your rest, because about this time of the semester, you realize you might need some sleep. But even more importantly that, rest is also a good reminder that we're finite. In other words, we can't run. We're not like God in the sense of we do grow weary, but it also reminds us that we're not God and that our work is not God. So it protects us from idolatry of self, and it also protects us from idolatry of work. When we unplug and step away and just say, hey, I might not be finished with this project, but I'm going to rest in the fact that I am not God and that my work is not God, and so therefore I will rest in that. So I encourage you guys, I know it's hard at C of O to rest, but please try to find as much as you can and try to have a day where you kind of unplug. All right, now let's roll into thinking kind of about some takeaways from creation, and this is where we're going to start touching on some of your BSQs. So I want you guys to share some of the things you talked about. So the first thing, we finished kind of the summary of the creation account. Now let's get into thinking about the God of creation. In other words, what can we learn about God from the creation account? Now, I don't know about you guys, but if you read Genesis 1 and 2, you can learn many things about God. But in this class, we have this thing called a test, and so I have to have you guys uniform in your answers, right? So I'm going to give you 3, but first I want to hear from a few of you all, maybe about what you wrote about as far as what you learned about God. I think that was your last question in your BSQ, right? I'm going to give you 3 again. These 3 to keep us on the same page. But the first one is what unites all believers. This is what unites us all in creation. So I know in a room this big, multiple different views of creation. But what the common belief all believers should share in common is that God is the creator of all things. this is kind of what is said about Jesus in John chapter 1. It says basically, nothing that was made apart from him. In other words, Jesus created everything that was made. Everything came through him. So everything in the universe owes its origin and existence to God. He is the creator of all things. All right? And this is where we unite as Christians. The second one that I have, the next two, let me just say the next two are both things that get emphasized later in the biblical story, especially in the Old Testament. And so the first one is, the first of the next one, this is the second one is, God is a wise God. God's wisdom. Wisdom. So you see this in Proverbs, you see this a lot in wisdom literature. We're going to talk about wisdom literature. Wisdom literature is tied to creation pretty tightly. But in particular, like in Proverbs 8, wisdom is personified as being like God's right-hand lady at creation. And the point is that what it's showing by Proverbs 8 saying that is that God was using his wisdom to create the universe. Now think about it, those of you who are maybe science majors or those of you who've ever had a science class, if you think about like biology and chemistry and just the vast amounts of research that have been done over the last few centuries, right, couple centuries, studying those fields of study, and yet how much information we still don't know and how much we're still discovering about our world. It's almost like the universe is a bottomless pit that we will never exhaust as humanity. And then that reminds us of what? Well, that God's the one who created that, who spoke that into existence, and therefore that reflects how deep his knowledge and his wisdom is. I mean, just take something simple. I have a friend whose wife, I just forgot the name of it. She's a doctor that does the inner ear. Yes, there we go, ENT, ear, nose, throat, yeah. But when she was doing her, her studies, I mean, she was blown away. As a Christian, she was just blown away at how intricate, how detailed, and how harmonious our inner ear works. It was just mind-boggling to her. And as a Christian, that's our reaction. Like, we see this and we're like, this is complicated, but yet it is so fine-tuned. And you're like, oh, that's because our God is the God of all wisdom and knowledge. And he can create that way. Okay? And then the last one, I would say, is probably the number one takeaway from creation when it comes to who God is. And that is his power. His power. So you guys think about it. We are living in a time of radical technological invention and transformation. I mean, it's just crazy how much stuff keeps coming out, how much stuff has come out. Over human history, it's just amazing, and how many just wonderful things that humans have invented. Like, for instance, today feels so much better in here, so we're so thankful that somebody invented the air conditioner, right? Also, I mean, the little devices we all carry around in our pockets, just mind-blowing how we can do that as humans. But you know what humanity has never been able to do? Humanity has never been able to take nothing, and by nothing, I mean absolutely nothing. That includes time and space, and create something. We always have to work with something that's already created. We have to work with raw material to create, to make. Okay? But God, on Genesis 1:1, he created everything, including time and space, out of absolutely nothing. The Latin phrase that theologians use is ex nihilo. In other words, God created out of nothing. And what does that show? That shows what a mighty and powerful God he is. Just think about this. All through the Bible, like Jeremiah, reflecting on how God created the world, he says, is therefore anything impossible for him? Right? If he can create the universe, what can't he do? And so think about this from our standpoint. Think about how many times as Christians we sweat the details, we worry about the future. when we have a God who, if he chooses, he is able to do anything and everything, as Paul says, above and beyond what we ask or even can imagine. That's the God that we serve. And we see that in creation. Okay? So creation reveals God's power. All right, so this is in your notes. Important question. Why did God create the world? The way there's a catechism, if you don't know what catechism is, it's like a series of questions and answers that have been used throughout church history to teach theology, to teach the Bible. And there's probably the most famous is called the Westminster Catechism. And the first question on it is, what is the chief end of man? And the answer is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. So I read Psalm 19 at the beginning of class, right? The heavens, what? Declare the glory of God. So God created a world. Check this out. He wasn't bored. He wasn't sitting up there like bored. He wasn't lonely. In fact, most theologians, beginning with C.S. Lewis, would argue that God was eternally satisfied in the relationship between the persons of the Trinity. Okay? So he wasn't lonely. He didn't need human companionship. He created so that we might glorify him. But here's the cool thing about that, is that the second part of that catechism says, and to enjoy him forever. So in creating, though, he loved us so much that when we do worship him, we enjoy him. So our ultimate joy comes from glorify him. So it's a win-win for us, right? He created us to worship him, and when we do so, it gives us maximum joy, right? So some of you might have heard of Augustine. I think in some of the psychology classes, they make y'all read the Confessions. Yes? Okay. Western Civ too. Good. Okay. Does anybody know the famous line from Augustine about finding satisfaction in God? He says, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. You see, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. So the point is this, that God wasn't lonely when he created, but if we're not seeking him, we're lonely. You got it? Because he created us to need him. He's the center of the universe, the hero of the story, right? The main character. All right. Now let's shift gears. So we've looked at the God of creation. Now let's talk about the creation itself. So what can we learn about creation itself from the creation account? Now, you guys had several questions that kind of danced around this. I don't think you didn't really have a BSQ question that was like directly like this, but you guys, I think, can tell me from your meditation on Genesis 1, and especially the repeated words and phrases. So what can we say? What can we learn about creation? Now, the first thing you should take away, if you didn't write anything else about creation, is its goodness. It was good. How many times is it was good repeated? So it's 7, but the 7th one is it was very good. Okay? So it was good, 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 and then it was very good. When we say that the creation was good, we usually associate that with what word? What do we usually say that word means in Genesis 1? Perfect. Yes, somebody said it. I don't know who said it, but perfect. We usually think that means perfect. Now, please hear me. Everybody listening? God's original creation was perfect. Not denying that. But I want us to dig a little deeper on this word good. So, when we use the word good in our everyday language, what are some of the ways we use the word good? Okay, pizza's good. So what are we saying? What does that mean there? What's a synonym we can use for it when pizza's good? Delicious, like it brings me pleasure. Good job means you performed well, right? Anybody else? So another way we use it is to contrast with what word? Bad, right? Or evil. So if I say she is a good person, I'm saying what? That she has good character. She's not an evil person. So we can use it in a moral sense too, which is, by the way, what you'll read about on Wednesday with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay. So here's what I'm saying. Let's think about it this way. If we see good in Genesis 1, it's perfect, and we flip over on Wednesday, you're going to read Genesis 2. And you know what we read about in Genesis 2? God said something's not good. Uh-oh. So if we're reading as perfect, then that means it wasn't perfect. So which one do we go with? And what was not good, by the way, in Genesis 2? Give me a little preview here. That man should be alone, so God created woman, right? He created the woman. And so what is it? We can interpret this many ways, but I think one thing to understand is that what was in chapter 1 you're reading last night, God told Adam and Eve to what? What was their commission? Called the creation mandate. Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Man cannot do that alone. So do you see what's happening here? In order to fulfill their created function, or his created function, Adam needed Eve. And so I would say, many scholars would argue this, that good in Genesis 1 is saying that it fulfills its intended purpose for creation. Again, we're not saying creation is not perfect. That's a given, but we're saying that it fulfills its intended purpose. That's what we mean by good. Which is why when Eve is done, everything's good then. After they have their little wedding there. Okay? Which leads to our next one, and that would be another word that we see is blessed. Just a brief comment here. There's 2 times God blesses something in the creation account. One was like the sea creatures, and the other was humanity. And both times it says, and God blessed them, and then it's followed with what? And he commanded them to, we just said it, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. So here's what this is saying. The blessing here, we'll talk about blessing more, but the blessing is saying that God is for his creation in the sense he is there to empower them to fulfill their intended function. Does that make sense? So like God is with his creation. He's empowering, he's for his creation to do what they were created to do. All right, then let's go to the other one that's ordered. This is so when we think about creation as ordered, think about it this way. There's 2 ways to look at this. One is, as we've already talked about, he created it in an orderly fashion. And that would like be the parallel of the 2 sets of 3, right? There's order there. But there's another way to think about order. There's another couple ways. He actually ordered it as well when on the sun and the moon. You remember it was to govern the days and the seasons and times, right? But I would also argue that in Genesis, implicitly, we can see a hierarchy. And who or what would be at the top of the hierarchy of creation? Humans, humanity. And then who would you put into that? This is going back to what we talked about earlier. Animals. And then under that, like plants, vegetation, right? Do y'all see why that is in creation? It's clear that that as you go through creation, you're growing kind of importance on that. And we'll talk about the humans in just a second. But the reason I say this is important is because many people in our culture are kind of confused on whether humans are the most important thing in creation, right? You agree with that or no, maybe? I'll give you 2 examples. One is what we might call like radical environmentalism, who would probably elevate trees over humans or something like that, right? Please hear me. I will see in just a second that we as humans are stewards over creation, and so I actually believe we should be conservationists. We should care about the environment, but we don't care about we shouldn't care more about the environment than we do humanity, right? So that's one way. Another way is I think you all can agree, and this is a little closer home, that many Americans would view animals as more important than some humans, right? The order's a little kicked out there. So this is going to be funny, but it's very sad. There was a 2013 study done by George Regents University. They took 500 participants, and they gave them a hypothetical scenario. And here's the scenario. A bus is rolling down a hill out of control. At the bottom of the hill, there is a dog and a human. And they asked the respondents, they say, who are you going to save first? And the answer was, all the participants said that if it were a close relative, like a sibling or a grandparent or even a really close friend, and a strange dog, they would save the human. But if you flipped it and it was your pet, their pet, versus somebody that was less known to them, 40% said they would save the dog. And ladies, I'm sorry, this is what the study says. 46% of women would save their dog over a foreign tourist, is what it said. Now, okay, listen. Let's just think about this. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your dog is the best thing since sliced bread. No dog anywhere in the world is more valuable than any human, right? Did I say that right? So there is no dog valuable than any human. Yeah, that's right. So humans are always infinitely more valuable. So therefore, as Christians, it should be an obvious answer. I saved a human life over a dog, right? But the point is that there is much confusion in our culture over pets. And if I had more time, I could really go on a soapbox on that, but we need to stop. But the question is, why is humanity the pinnacle of creation? So write that really fast. I'm going to flip the side, and then I'll tell you the answer. But it's what truly separates us from everything else. And that would be, what is it? Thank you. The image of God. The Latin phrase is called imago Dei, the image of God. So here's how this works. Real quick, I got to shut down so I can show you all the video. The theologians debate all the time over what is the image of God. Is it our rationality? Is it the fact that we're social beings? Is it the fact that we're moral beings? The list could go on and on. But the Bible emphasizes two things about us being made in the image of God. One that I've already mentioned is that we have dominion. So make sure you get these two, by the way. So the image of God gives us two things as humans. One is dominion. We rule over God's creation as stewards. And a steward is simply like a manager. It's God's creation. We manage it for him, which is why we will be held accountable for how we manage creation. Two, though, and this is huge, both in Genesis 9 and in the New Testament book of James, the image of God is connected to human value. So human value, or human dignity, however you want to put it. If it helps you to remember two D's, you can go dominion and dignity. But here's the deal. The image of God gives us inherent worth. Our culture, people are searching for worth. And oftentimes our culture assigns worth based on what a person looks like, what a person can do, who a person knows, or what a person has. Do y'all not agree? It's arbitrary, and so you can be valuable one day as long as you serve someone else's needs, but when that stops, you're not valuable. That should not be the case ever for Christians. As Christians, because we recognize all humans are valuable, then we should treat all humans as valuable people. This is why it's why Christians should be always in opposition to anything that devalues human life, like racism, economic discrimination, pornography, abortion, end of age, like not valuing the elderly. The list goes on and on. Anything that devalues a human, we have to be opposed to it as Christians, because we recognize that it doesn't matter how good or bad they are, because they're made in the image of God, they have inherent value and worth, and therefore we should treat them in that manner. Okay? So I'm going to close real quick with a video that kind of emphasizes that in a better way.